So, you've been assigned to teach public speaking. It's not essay writing, and it's not theater. We want to make the experience as beneficial for our students as possible. We want them to leave our classroom empowered, inspired, and confident in their skill sets. But who has the time to read research and go to workshops? That's where I come in. My name is Julian, and you're listening to the Public Speaking Educators Forum. This podcast is for educators who teach public speaking. Each week, you'll hear from a fellow instructor who has an interesting trick to the trade to share with you. We are speaking up so that you can help your students to speak up too. Tonight on the forum, we'll be chatting with Kiana Kikuchi, who is a graduate teaching assistant at San Diego State University in California. Kiana will be sharing some insights into her experiences teaching Zoom as part of her general education speech course. Kiana, welcome to the forum.
Thank you, Julian. Happy to be here.
We're happy to have you. So, teaching Zoom, the bane of everyone's existence these past few months, perhaps, but also maybe a technological opportunity for public speaking courses. I understand you teach a course called Oral Communication, or COM 103. Could you just tell me a little bit about that class?
Yeah, so at SDSU, we have this class offered to our freshmen, and it is basically the introduction to public speaking. A majority of our freshmen do take this course just to help them get ready for college level presentations and, of course, their future careers as well.
Okay, and had you integrated video conferencing, telecommunication software such as Zoom, WebEx, etc., prior to COVID-19?
Pretty much not. The only thing we had before was we asked the students to record their presentation as they presented it in class and then write a review. And that's pretty much the extent of our technology going through this class. And of course, an online ebook for their textbook.
All righty. Had you used Zoom prior to COVID-19?
No, I had honestly only heard about it as an option for online classes and an option for meetings, but never really knew about Zoom or used it until the COVID restrictions.
And that makes two of us. It was an interesting learning curve. So, and I imagine it was an interesting learning curve for a lot of our students. So, teaching technology, when we think of a traditional public speaking course, traditional meaning, a COVID-free world, we don't tend to think of it as having a lot of technology. In fact, a lot of faculty, they kind of want it to be anti-technology. We want to speak, we want to listen, we want to make eye contact. So when I think about integrating technology, whether it's teaching PowerPoint or in this case, teaching software, it's almost like a whole different pedagogical strategy, if you will. So how do you present Zoom? Right now in the context, it's probably pretty self-explanatory, but presenting it and teaching it, how do you go about that in your classes?
I try to keep that portion of my classes to a minimum. I really only teach them what they need to know as far as how to record their speeches on speech days and how to put up virtual backgrounds when they present if they don't want to clean their room that morning. So really basic things are what I go over, and I try to leave it up to them. I know some of my kids are super smart. They've got moving videos as their background, and they're telling me how to do breakout rooms when that first started. So it was definitely a good exchange and a good conversation. In a lot of ways, we've been helping each other, especially that first transitional semester onto Zoom. Now I feel like for the most part, everyone's gotten the hang of it. Everyone's had to record something. Everyone's had to put up a virtual background. So it's gotten much easier, that's for sure.
Yeah, and it's interesting how the students kind of jump in and help every now and then. Oh, professor, that's where you click to do that. Or professor, you have to give us permission to share your screen, things like that. So
oh, yes.
So we're all in this together, I suppose. So do you have tutorials that you use? Like, have you designed any instruction in Zoom, like a Zoom how-to? Do you do anything like that?
I have. A few of my lectures have been based around step-by-step processes of how to record their speech or how to raise their hand or screen share. So again, really basic stuff, only stuff that they would need to know for my own class. I kind of leave the rest up to them. I know they get curious, so they tend to figure that kind of stuff out on their own.
Okay. Are there any tools within the program that you really want your students to understand how to use? I know you named a couple just in conversation so far, but as far as like if you were putting a lesson plan together about Zoom, what would sort of be like the top priority? The students need to know this in a public speaking class.
Definitely the recording and the screen share. I know sometimes, especially if they are presenting with videos, I know there's certain audio settings that make the video sound better, but then suddenly we can't hear them as well. And I know I don't understand that sort of technology. I know my computer science students know it much better than I do, but having to go through those really nitpicky things of making sure your audio comes out right. Oh, I recommend you use a headphone with a microphone so that your voice comes out clearer, and really utilizing your camera and how to maintain eye contact with that camera. And of course, everything that comes along with troubleshooting, my goodness, troubleshooting any issues where your camera isn't working. Maybe you have to restart Zoom. So those types of things are definitely conversations I try to minimally have in class. And if it comes up, I try to have that conversation one-on-one with the students on troubleshooting specifically.
Are there any tools that you maybe discourage the students from using, or maybe even restrict as far as during the classroom, I don't want you using this, or I'd rather you not use this during speeches, et cetera? Is there anything that you set as sort of a no-no as far as Zoom?
Nothing as far as restricting them. I've been pretty open just because, hey, if it works, let's just get it done. All I care is that you're able to be creative with how you're presenting. I know, especially being on Zoom, these presentations can get very monotonous. So any outlet of creativity, I highly encourage my students to take advantage of, whether that be Google Slides or using PowerPoint or Prezi, anything with presentation aids, or getting creative with their own outfits when they present. I just want them to not be afraid to speak or feel discouraged because it is on a computer.
Okay. So, as you know, and as probably the majority of the people listening to this would agree, delivering a presentation or a speech in front of a live audience is very different from delivering it sitting at your desk talking into your camera. So in addition to all of the technological concerns, we also have different performance domains, shall we say, because it is a different style of presenting. So what are the performance domains that you sort of expect your students to uphold to, or that you encourage them to utilize when they're presenting virtually as opposed to presenting in front of an audience?
Yeah, especially that first semester where we went from being in person to going on Zoom, it was really difficult because I had to restructure all of my rubrics for their presentation. So I was talking with my director and we were having all kinds of meetings on how to change it. So new things that sort of came up was how to have eye contact with the audience. It's suddenly you have to look at this little black dot on your computer screen, and that's kind of weird because everyone's faces are on the screen, but you can see when their eyes are a little bit lowered, it kind of disengages with the audience. Even things like kinesics, we can't move around the room and utilize space like that anymore. It's all about gestures, but then even those gestures, you have to bring them up a little higher because you're typically sitting at a desk and we can't see them when they're more by your torso. You have to bring them more up to your chest. So having those conversations with my students have been a little tedious just because I know they don't expect this Zoom stuff to last forever. So I try to encourage them to think, well, we don't know how long we're going to be on Zoom. We don't know how much we're going to rely on Zoom after these restrictions begin to start being lifted. So giving them motivation to retain this information and retain these practices, especially since there are so many unknowns. But I feel like they are really receptive to them. They do start to understand the importance of the way they present themselves on camera on a Zoom platform. And something I recently implemented in my lesson plans for that lesson in particular is bringing in news anchors, because if we think about it, news anchors look directly into the camera. They have their gestures. They are usually sitting at a desk, and being able to present themselves to an audience on a screen is their whole deal. So bringing that in as an example, I think got a lot more positive feedback. The students really understand that better than saying, well, this is Zoom reality. This is what we got to do now. This is how I need you to do it. Giving something a little more tangible and someone to look up to in a way. Looking for exemplars has really helped with that lesson this semester.
That's great to hear. And that's obviously something they are familiar with. Even long before COVID, we've been watching news anchors perform in this way. I guess, it's probably not their instinct to compare the two, because, you're dealing with industry standard equipment. You're in a studio, or they, being the news anchors, are in the studio versus you're sitting in your bedroom talking into your laptop or your tablet. So when we think about teaching technology, it is obviously an employable skill, knowing how to use video conferencing software. In theory, one could list that on their resume. So as far as the perceived usefulness of learning how to present in terms of a mediated environment, do you feel like students have really bought into that? I know you mentioned a minute ago that they still perceive this sort of as a temporary thing, but do students, have they embraced it from that vantage point, that this is a professional skill I'm gaining?
Yes, definitely. And I think we shouldn't just take Zoom for granted or as something that is only going to happen in a long distance meeting or a long distance presentation. I think we still will have these long distance meetings, especially students who are expecting to go into the professional field or even staying in academia, where we might have these guest lectures that are more long distance. We don't have to wait for someone to come visit anymore. We all know how to use Zoom. We all have that experience. So my own prediction is that Zoom will not leave us anytime soon. And I think that they are starting to understand that, especially being in school for over a year, having to deal with this and being in a world where this is becoming more prominent. I think that they are starting to accept the idea that they're going to have to do this in some capacity at some point in their careers. In addition to that, I do think that Zoom still has those nerves. I see my students get so nervous, even though they're sitting in their own bedroom, where I know for them it should be a safe space. They still have those, oh, geez, I've got 20 kids looking at me and I'm getting graded by my instructor for this. So the nerves and the typical student nerves that come with public speaking are not absent in the Zoom setting. And I think that's something instructors and professors should not take for granted. I think it's something that we can still turn into those teachable moments that we haven't lost since COVID started.
Do you ever have your students actually create Zoom meetings and facilitate them? Does that ever come up at all?
No, that actually hasn't come up, but that actually sounds like a really good idea. I might steal that from you.
And last semester, for the final project in my class, I had the students not only use Zoom, but they had to create the meeting. They had to send the link out to their classmates with the password. And then it was sort of on them to have to go through and sweat a little bit as they made sure that it worked and hoping that everybody got the code and all that stuff. So another teachable moment, if I can offer one, I suppose. So you kind of hinted at this as well. I guess you and I are just on sync with this interview. But eventually, I can only hope and pray, COVID will be behind us and we can go back, or at least partially go back to the way things were done prior to the pandemic. But that brings us to the question of, will we completely throw all this stuff out once it's deemed safe to have classes of 20 plus people in the same room? Do you feel like this will stay a part of the public speaking curriculum, like teaching, even if it's not our sole way of teaching and delivering speeches? Do you feel like this will still have a place in the public speaking course?
I think it definitely could, especially in a recording setting. I think we have utilized the fact that we can just record our presentation, especially if we're not in a setting where we might be taking questions or having a panel discussion. I know other public speaking courses have said at least one of their speeches be pre-recorded, and then they play that recording to the class. So I think that's something we can definitely carry on once we move past all the COVID restrictions.
I remember life before COVID, I remember that business communication courses and, of course, those classes that had to do with media production and so forth, recording was a big piece of it. Business communication courses would sometimes stress virtual meetings, back channeling, so on and so forth. But you didn't see it so much in the gen ed, usually 100 or 200 level public speaking course. So that has intrigued me in the sense of, well, we've done it, and maybe it can stay to some degree. I don't think we want to spend 15 weeks on Zoom, but doing a unit on that, or maybe requiring one assignment being done that way, could certainly have some benefit going forward.
Yeah, definitely. And that actually makes me think of how for my class we have 3 speeches presented live on Zoom, and then one of them is recorded. And I know I get mixed reviews all the time about some of the classes really liked recording their speech and not having to present live, and others were like, oh, I hated having to organize a recording and sit and do it by myself. And so it's so interesting to hear the different opinions, but I do think that I agree there is value in practicing those recordings and taking that initiative to set that up yourself and submit it to whoever you're submitting it to.
And by incorporating both modes of recording, it's almost like you're giving the students an asynchronous speaking situation as well as a synchronous speaking situation. So
yes, totally.
So that comes with a lot of benefits as well. Well, this just about concludes this week's episode of the Public Speaking Educators Forum. Thank you, Kiana, for taking time out of your schedule to chat with us. And of course, thank you all for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast on Spotify and audible.com. Follow us on Twitter at PSEF Podcast, and be sure to tune in again real soon.